Suppose I were to begin by saying that I had fallen in love with a color. A color that I, for many years, had turned my back on, that I had underappreciated, that I had found common, uninteresting. A color that I have recently begun to welcome back into my life. I'm definitely not the first person in the history of the world to be interested in the color blue. There's a long succession of individuals before me who have been inspired by, obsessed with, and devoted to the color blue. I think of Maggie who wrote Bluets, a text which uses the color blue as an entryway to explore the wide spectrum of emotions and experiences that she has had in her life. She documents the way blue manifests in her life, both from the seemingly random occurrences to the deeply significant ones. She explores the different emotions that seeing the color and different shades of the color blue can invoke in her, as well as exploring the history of the color, from its physical pigments to its use in language and the way that it's occurred throughout time. I think of British filmmaker Derek Jarman and his final film, Blue. Unfortunately, in the late 1980s, Jarman was diagnosed as HIV positive, and one of the complications that came along with his disease was partial blindness. As his life progressed, his vision gradually became more and more impaired, meaning that he could often only see in shades of blue. The film's audio landscape is very rich. It features narration from the filmmaker himself, from other actors and friends. There's storytelling strands as well as streams of consciousness and simulations of what Jarman's daily life and lived experience would have been like, walking on the street, hearing ambient noise around. But the visual of the film is a still of a very saturated shade of blue. Not only does this speak to what would have been the filmmaker's new lived experience, it also demonstrates the huge impact that the disease can have, especially through the lens of an individual whose life, whose career was so dependent on his ability to see and create visually appealing works. For Derek Jarman to be a filmmaker and gradually lose his eyesight, that still blue color really drives home the stark contrast between what he was able to create and now what his reality is as a result of the disease. And it's a really kind of poignant, almost uncomfortable experience to be looking at that and trying to grapple with it as the film progresses. I recently learned about the filmmaker through an article my dear friend Iman wrote on her Substack, Moon and Tether, and she describes her visit to his famous cottage in Dungeness in Kent, which he moved to shortly after he received his diagnosis. I highly recommend that you read the article and subscribe while you're there, because she is an incredible, incredible writer. When discussing the color blue, it's difficult to not discuss the artist Yves Klein, who, much like Picasso, had a blue epoch in his career and famously developed international Klein blue. In the 1950s, the artist had already been creating monochromatic paintings in a variety of colors, but when exhibited together, viewers and critics would often try to make some sort of sequence out of them or story, perhaps viewing them together as a collective or even a mosaic, which was against the artist's intentions. In order to get the viewer to really just focus on the color of the canvas and the experience of viewing that color, the artist decided that he had to push the monochromatic one step further and created a series in only one color, the Klein blue. For his Blue Epoch series, Klein painted 11 canvases in the exact same shade of blue that was created by using an ultramarine pigment. Ultramarine is highly valuable and wasn't accessible to most in the world until the last 500 or 600 years. It's typically made by grinding up the lapis lazuli stone, which is often found in Afghanistan, and it was brought to Europe during the Renaissance by the Italians. Because it was so valuable, it was only kept for very special details, such as the robes of the Virgin Mary in paintings. The name ultramarine comes from the Latin ultramarinus, which means beyond the sea. So it's interestingly not even the blue of the ocean itself that is quite common, known to all, very accessible, but it's the blue beyond that blue, which is something that's almost out of reach for many, and that speaks to its very high value and how special it is. But this was the pigment that Klein used as the base for his blue, and typically its vibrancy would wear off with time, meaning that the color would often appear dull, but he was able to manipulate it in such a way that it retained that kind of light from within and that life in itself. None of the 11 canvases were valued at the same price. He instead encouraged the viewers and the potential buyers to experience each of the 11 for themselves and see which one of them resonated the most with them and which one they felt was the most highly valuable to them individually, because our perception of color is so subjective. The most immediate connotation that many of us may have with color blue is that of sadness. If somebody is feeling upset or down, we typically describe them as feeling blue. Think of Picasso's blue period, in which most of his paintings were created using blue paint, and it was a time in his career and life that was marked by poverty, illness, melancholy. Even the physical embodiment of the emotion sadness in the character in Inside Out is blue. And of course, how can we forget the famous metaphor, the curtains were blue, which, as your English teacher will tell you, meant that the author or the narrator was sad. Even in non-visual manifestations, the color blue, which is something we typically see, seeps through. Think of the whole genre of the blues, which came about as a result of Africans being brought over into America as slaves, and they used traditional motifs or elements from African music when they were brought over to express their sorrow and their lamentation at the experience of what they had been put through. Think of Joni Mitchell's album Blue, which was created in the aftermath of a breakup. Of course, there's Lana Del Rey, and blue manifests across her albums, across her career in many different ways. I think I could dedicate an entire video to the various ways in which blue comes up in her lyrics, but many times, though not exclusively, it is used to express sadness. Almost 20 years ago, my mom came up with a creative project for her and I to work on together, and it was called Colors in My Rainbow. And we went through all of the different colors and the way that they made me feel as a child through the five senses. So how they tasted, how they smelled, what they felt like, what they looked like, the way that I felt when I saw them. And I had to dig through some old boxes, but I found my folder for the color blue. When I see blue, I feel happy. Blue is the beautiful sky. Blue smells like magic. Blue feels smooth like a butterfly. If blue could speak, it would whisper softly like a lullaby. Blue would taste slippery like Jell-O. I think we have to consider the way that we perceive color, and maybe to a larger extent reality entirely, but perhaps that's for another day, is subjective, and that color in and of itself is not necessarily a fixed state of being. When looking at an object, we have to consider the way that the object itself absorbs light, the way that it reflects light, if there's anything in the atmosphere that might interfere with the way that the rays of light coming from an object reach our eyes. Then we also have to consider our eyes. Human eyes are also different to many other animal species' eyes, and then the way that our brain processes the information that it receives from the eye as well. In humans, our retinas have color receptor cells, also known as cones, and we're trichromatic, meaning that we see in 3 groups of colors: red, green, and blue. And interestingly, even though there is a higher population density of red and green cones in our eyes, it is actually the cones that detect blue light that are the most sensitive to light of that color. When we consider all of this, color becomes far less stable, and what we experience when we look at an object of a certain color is less so a property of that object, but more so our sensation of the color of that object instead. There is something in nature known as structural coloration. If we take the example of the blue morpho butterfly, its wings appear this color to us because they are composed of thousands of little scales which have ridges upon them, and it is the nanostructure of these ridges which means that the way light is absorbed is unique. So green and red light is actually absorbed more by these structures, and it is the blue light that reflects off of the structures, which enables us to perceive the color blue, when in fact there is no blue pigment present in the butterfly's wings. This is what fascinates me about the color blue. It is at once common. It's a color that many would say is their favorite color. It's one that many brands and marketeers use in their campaigns as their logo because it will have a wide appeal. Even our oceans, which make up 70% of our planet's surface, are blue. And yet, at the same time, this color is still so elusive. It feels almost out of touch, out of reach, and beyond our grasps. The world is blue at its edges and in its depths. This blue is the light that got lost. Light at the blue end of the spectrum does not travel the whole distance from the sun to us. It disperses among the molecules of the air. It scatters in water. Water is colorless. Shallow water appears to be the color of whatever lies underneath it. But deep water is full of this scattered light. The purer the water, the deeper the blue. The sky is blue for the same reason, but the blue at the horizon, the blue of land that seems to be dissolving into the sky, is a deeper, dreamier, melancholy blue. The blue at the farthest reaches of the places where you see for miles, the blue of distance. The light that does not touch us, does not travel the whole distance. The light that gets lost gives us the beauty of the world, so much of which is the color blue. For many years, I have been moved by the blue at the far edge of what can be seen. That color of horizons, of remote mountain ranges, of anything far away. The color of solitude and of desire. The color of there seen from here. The color of where you are not. And the color of where you can never go. For the blue is not in the places those miles away at the horizon, but in the atmospheric distance between you and the mountains. Longing, says the poet Robert Hast, because desire is full of endless distances. Blue is the color of longing for the distances you'll never arrive in. For the blue world.